Hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple. A Weequay Padawan was standing next to his peers at Jedi Master Kachi's funeral. Masters Dooku and Windu had just returned from Raxus Secundus, where she was located. The Padawan was standing next to his Jedi Master in Ima-Gun-Di. The Nikito Jedi Master selected young Hondo Ohnaka due to his great prowess in the Force. There was a lot of potential for the young Jedi, and Master Gun-Di knew that. As a former member of the Helios clan of the Jedi Order, Master Gun-Di could assist Hondo to excel in something he wasn't proficient with. The clan was one of many inside the Jedi Temple that was used to separate initiates. This particular one was taught and watched over by Tera Sinube. There was an odd thing with Hondo. Well, there were a lot of odd things about young Ohnaka, but the main one being that Hondo had a speciality in using blasters. How uncivilized. How did Ima-Gun-Di figure this out? Well, Hondo used a blaster one day. How did Hondo get that blaster? No one knew. It just appeared. The dude found it or crafted it or stole it, but he was just using the stun round on the weapon and blasting an assortment of training droids. Ima-Gun-Di wasn't at all upset. He was firstly impressed with Hondo's accuracy with the weapon he had no previous training in, and then he was extremely confused because how on Coruscant did he get a hold of the pistol? It was especially odd because despite Hondo's skill with the Force, he was greatly underskilled with a lightsaber. He specialized in using a pistol and it didn't make a ton of sense. Ima-Gun-Di, as a talented lightsaber user, wanted to work on Hondo's lightsaber skill, which wasn't the easiest thing for Hondo to get through. He had a passion for learning through the Force, but using a lightsaber always put him in what he believed was a disadvantageous position. Because Ima-Gun-Di was a Nikito and Hondo Ohnaka was a Weequay, they were constantly hanging around the mid-rim. With Ima's ability to use a lightsaber and his interest in assisting Hondo's growth, they spent a lot of time inside of hostile environments. As a Padawan, Hondo was very observant and he was a good listener, though being a Jedi didn't deter him from being himself. Hondo had a very boisterous personality. Ima-Gun-Di did not mind this at all, and while Master Gun-Di was very strict as a Jedi Master, what Hondo did not break the code or anything like that. He was just simply a happy person, and there was no reason to take that away from him. Hondo's personality cultivated everyone around him. He was always speaking in different speech patterns and crafting meticulous jokes. Hondo may have been a Jedi in every which aspect, but he was always true to himself. His practice in the Force allowed him to excel through his youngling training. His struggles, on the other hand, with a lightsaber were developed over the years with his master. Late into his career as a Jedi Padawan, Hondo came up with an idea. He and Master Gun-Di had practiced once, and it resulted in Hondo concocting what he believed to be a brilliant idea, though he'd never seen it done before. While they were out in the mid-rim, in a scummy location, Hondo broke off a few pieces of a couple stray blasters laying around, and using his few mechanical skills, he rebuilt around his existing lightsaber. Hondo already had such an eccentric taste, so what he ended up crafting was an elegant beast. Quite the oxymoron, but it proved to be true. The blade that Hondo rebuilt was gorgeous, though on the front of it hung a little edge. Inside of the edge sat a trigger function, and just above it was an emitter that connected down to the base of the weapon. Mind you, it was in the middle of the night when Hondo turned on the lightsaber. He messed up. It didn't exactly do what he wanted it to do. The lightsaber ignited from both sideways emitters and the top one, which shot a hole into the wall. Hondo covered his mouth in shock and turned the weapon off. Whoopsies. He scared the soul out of a couple of stray animals near the wall, but aside from that, nothing too damaging. Hondo opened up the weapon and realized that he accidentally connected something that shouldn't have been where it was, and so once he reconfigured the weapon, it worked like a regular lightsaber, but now it had a slight edge, something that Hondo could use to his personal traits. At the edge of the weapon was a stun gun. Nothing too hurtful, but just something that would do well for him. Of course, it wasn't the first time a Jedi came up with an extra design with a lightsaber. One of the younglings thought it'd be cool to make a lightsaber with nunchucks. Hondo thought that Obi-Wan was just out of his mind. That little sadistic Jedi might be onto something, but also a little maddening. Regardless, in the morning, the weapon was shown off to Ima-Gun-Di, and he praised his student's weapon. This did actually aid Hondo in his growth with a lightsaber. While he was skilled, being a Jedi from the era of the Republic, he wasn't talented with the blade. Having his moments like every Jedi did, he now had something that could contribute to his skill with a lightsaber. For Hondo, nothing too grand would happen between this mission, of which he crafted his newest addition to the lightsaber and his knighting ceremony. He was pleased to be a knight and quickly jumped back into the field. Hondo, despite his outward and even sometimes rambunctious personality, had a heart of gold. This made him a truly remarkable Jedi. He also avoided using typical Jedi robes like Ima-Gun-Di or Sora Bulk. Hondo believed that wearing Jedi robes would expose him, and without them, he felt a lot freer. The Order didn't really prohibit it, it was just an odd sight to see inside the temple. Hondo quickly became familiar with Qui-Gon Jinn and Master Dooku, though Hondo got along with Qui-Gon a lot more than he did with Dooku. He had the same feelings towards Dooku as the Council did, seeing Dooku as a bit of an idealist who strayed too far away from the Jedi Order. Hondo always liked Qui-Gon's philosophy and his radiant personality. The two of them meshed really well, and despite Obi-Wan's excitement for lightsaber nunchucks, Hondo got along with him really well as well. They became close friends and worked as a trio from time to time. Though most of these incidents were on Coruscant, where Hondo was just brought up to help find a group of mercenaries or whatnot. Hondo had all the connections, and while he always kept himself busy, he became enamored with a new talent discovered within himself inside of the Force. Hondo found that he could use Force Psychometry. He didn't need access to the restricted section to know what it was. The young Quinlan Vos already showed the ability to use it, and well, Hondo paid attention to just about everything within the Force, so he understood when it first happened to him. The worst part is he discovered his talent by accident, but it was the most Hondo thing ever. He was organizing things in his room inside of the Jedi Temple, and he picked up a little collectible he had earned after stopping a heist, and he was thrown into an array of visions, leading to the heist and the crafting of the little collectible. He threw the collectible out after learning how it was crafted. The sights haunted his mind for about a day and a half until he pushed them out of his memory. Years down the line, Hondo expressed interest in shifting his focus on missions. He spent a lot of time with criminals and stopping mercenaries and stuff like that, which was all good and all because it smelled like profit for people who were not being killed or losing their money or being sold into weird traffics and such. However, he had an interest in the realm of diplomacy. Master Qui-Gon, who he was very close with, happened to be going on a mission created by Chancellor Valorum, and so he was invited to come along. Oh, he wished he hadn't opened his mouth. One thing led to another. A Trade Federation thing, a blockade, an invasion of Naboo, a sneak attack to liberate the Queen, a trip to Tatooine, a pod race, a kid. It was just so much. And he just wished he stayed in the Undercity, knocking off hooligans and feeling like a gangster, pulling up in his Fly Guy pirate jacket and whipping out his pistol lightsaber and going to town on those fools. Seriously, it didn't get much better than that. This whole diplomacy thing was cool and all, but it just never ended. Regardless, a mission is a mission, and he would complete it. This had Hondo returning to Naboo with the Queen, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon. For whatever reason, the child from Tatooine was here too, but Hondo didn't care as long as he didn't become roadkill. Inside of the hangar bay, they encountered the Zabrak Sith from Tatooine. At least, he seemed like a Sith. For Hondo, this was kind of weird because Dooku seemed extremely knowledgeable about the rising darkness when they conversed inside the temple earlier. Guess it wasn't that big of a deal, but something about it felt off to Hondo. Regardless, with the ignition of his lightsaber, he, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan were engaged in a fight against a very talented adversary. For Maul, he wasn't necessarily afraid of this. His teachings from Sidious had him believing that he could fight anyone and live through it with no problems. That's how he felt here and now. He had no real reason to assume that there would be any issues with fighting this trio. 4 blades moved around. The advantage for Maul was Hondo's inefficiency with a blade, and how the 3 of them hadn't ever worked together during a fight. Maul noticed immediately that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon worked as an efficient duo together, so if he could single out Hondo, then he might be able to kill him as well. The Jedi moved around defending each other. Qui-Gon, being the oldest, was able to wear down Maul. However, he was tiring himself out as well. All Maul knew is that the Jedi had strength in numbers, and that he wanted to make sure they didn't have a chance to kill him, though death was a better fate than defeat. If he returned the Sidious without having killed the Jedi or stopping the rescue of Naboo, he'd be tortured for the rest of his life. The fight got more intense gradually, and it pushed into a large energy chamber. In this room, Qui-Gon and Maul were separated from Obi-Wan and Hondo. Obi-Wan had fallen down a couple of stories, but Hondo was right behind Qui-Gon. At the last second, through an intense duel, Maul leapt behind Qui-Gon and used the Force to throw him off of his feet into one of the several layers of Rey's shields. Before they all closed, Maul used a bit of Force speed and trapped himself with Hondo. He could see that Hondo was the weakest of the trio, and he could kill him before separating the other 2 Jedi and killing Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan separately as well. The worst part is, Hondo knew that Maul was much stronger than him. He wasn't going to try and act like it wasn't the truth. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon stood looking over. Had they all been separated, Qui-Gon would have meditated, but both he and his apprentice were on edge. Maul and Hondo looked at each other. Maul showed his teeth, and Hondo twisted his eyebrows. He knew that this wasn't the place to be sassy as ever, but if he was going to die, he'd die being himself. Maul blasted his lightsaber forward and Hondo ducked blocking. They only had so much room to maneuver in, and so they traded blows with each other. Both of them were so far from their full potential, a battle of light and dark presiding in one small tomb. Only one victor could come out on top. Hondo ducked under a swing and was kicked in the back of the head and slid to the corner of the small chamber. Hondo looked up and saw his lightsaber laying next to him. Maul smiled with his gnarly yellow teeth and thrusted his blade above his head and dragged it down with a hissing sound. Hondo, using his quick thinking, pulled his blade with the force and in a last-ditch effort, began firing the edge of the blade into Maul. The stun rounds wouldn't typically do much to a force user, but at such a close range with so many being fired, they rattled Maul so much that his precise strike slipped away from him. The moment the blade slammed into the ground, the shields opened, and the force was thrown at Maul by Kenobi, which lifted the Sith off of his feet. His lightsaber dropped to the ground, and he slammed into the wall with his face connecting with the metal before sliding to the ground as well. Qui-Gon moved Maul out of the way so that he wouldn't be hurt by the shield. He also kept his distance, just in case. The shields came back on, and Obi-Wan and Hondo were in the same chamber. Obi-Wan asked if Hondo was alright, and he nodded his head. He was surprised. It's not that stuns wouldn't work on a Force user as a whole, they just slowed them down. However, Hondo didn't know that because he never used the stun rounds on anyone with so much power in the Force. He just used it on bounty hunters and mercenaries and whatnot, none of them having so much capability within the living Force. Obi-Wan deignited his weapon and reached his hand out, but before he could, Hondo looked down and saw Maul's blade. Without even thinking, he reached over and grabbed it and was transferred to the last place he wanted to be. Hondo, a man with such a bright and optimistic outlook on everything, was haunted by what he saw. He felt the cold crystal of the Sith lightsaber bleed into his hands. He looked down, and then when he looked up, he wasn't on Naboo. He was in a cold and damp facility. When his head turned over, he saw a younger version of the Zabrak warrior on the ground, pleading for mercy. Above him, his master told him that there was no mercy. The vision stretched further, and Hondo saw a wealthy banker standing behind the other Sith. Why was Hego Damask involved with them? Hondo was transported to another location. He could see Maul toiling in his room, forcing himself down the dark path, finding reasons in his mind to hate the Jedi, reasons to resent them. The logical conclusion Maul had was that the Jedi had found him unworthy or ignored him overall. He saw the Jedi not believing he was adequate enough to be one of them, when in reality they never knew he was born. Hondo felt his heart crumble into a million pieces. His empathetic heart of gold was broken watching a young child be tortured and created into a creature of darkness. The lightsaber bled with all of Maul's torture, and while the crystal itself didn't call out to Hondo, it showed him all the pain that the young Zabrak suffered through. Hondo was thrusted back into the moment, and he looked around. He could feel the darkness creeping away from him. There must have been a look on Hondo's face, because it forced a reaction from Obi-Wan. He asked what was wrong, and Hondo said that the Sith assassin was in so much pain. He struggled up to his feet and said that he saw the banker Hego Damask. Qui-Gon could hear the conversation, and as the shields opened, he asked why Hego was being mentioned, which had Qui-Gon informing Hondo that Hego Damask had been reported as missing for the last 24 hours. He wasn't seen in his personal residence. Due to Hondo's vision, they locked Maul up and brought him back to the hangar bay sedated, using the collective force between the three of them to help him stay in a silent rest, which likely would have been the most peaceful time of his entire life. As the invasion of Naboo came to an end with a victory for the Gungans and the Naboo, Maul was discreetly transported back to Coruscant under the protection of Mace Windu, Hondo Ohnaka, and the future Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Mace simply informed the Chancellor that he would be unable to stay due to a pressing issue inside the Jedi Temple. Sidious knew that this was some sort of lie, but he couldn't figure out what it was. At this point, he figured Maul had been killed, which left him with his future pupil in Dooku as the only two remaining Sith in the galaxy. Qui-Gon, while keeping his ties away from the Council, would inform them of everything. This would receive a hefty apology from the Council for not believing him when he suggested that the Sith had returned. This apology coming directly from the Grand Master himself for having doubted Qui-Gon. However, this was also accompanied by great thanks and appreciation for having stopped Maul and sedated him so that they could learn more about him and the Sith's return. Qui-Gon listened and used this as leverage. He told Yoda that he was grateful for the acceptance of the Council, but all he wanted to do was train young Skywalker. Yoda wasn't exactly pleased with the response, but he knew it was coming. The Council didn't agree with it, but they would accept it. They would accept it because of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's ability to bring a Sith to justice while keeping him alive. Due to this, Anakin would become Qui-Gon's student, and they would celebrate the victory and unity of Naboo. After the celebration, the Jedi and the Chancellor returned to Coruscant. Mace was told everything by Hondo, which had him genuinely surprised but genuinely saddened. He understood the dark side. His use of a pod allowed him to understand its capabilities, so he felt terrible for someone like Maul. Though the reason the Jedi never found him is they never went to Dathomir. Mother Talzin wasn't exactly fond of the Jedi, and she wasn't exactly fond of the Sith either, but they all had their agreements. It wasn't tense, but it was also not friendly. It was a weird middle ground, and they typically didn't cross paths with each other. Mace expressed that the Jedi would try and handle everything with Maul from here on out. If they needed any extra assistance, they could reach out for help if they needed it, especially from Hondo. Though because of Hondo's findings, he told Mace that he would be interested in beginning an investigation into the issues regarding Hego Damask. Mace didn't actually have an issue with this. However, he requested that if both him and the young Jedi were to work on it, that they bring an elder Jedi into the mix, just to be on the safe side. Thankfully, Hondo was very close with someone who could help him. His master, being a former member of the Helios clan, was super close to Tera Sinube. This had Hondo and Obi-Wan going to find Master Gundi, who was inside of the temple, and requesting that he help them with getting Master Tera Sinube on the case. Tera was taking a nap when he was first approached, but he agreed to help, especially because both Hondo and Obi-Wan seemed eager in their endeavors. However, for an investigation like this, they couldn't just spy on Hego Damask. He was shortly after they returned to Coruscant reportedly found dead in his apartment, so the Jedi needed another means of watching him. They went through thousands upon thousands of files. The Jedi archives had everything they needed, but it took them several days of digging. They went through every news article, magazine, public record of finances, Damask Holdings records that were made public to the galaxy, every known location of Hego. It was a long and arduous process. If Hondo wasn't here, it would have been very boring. But he lightened the mood with jokes and stories from missions he went on throughout the years. He was as charming as he was smart. Maul, on the other hand, was going through his own arduous process, though it wasn't being inflicted by the Jedi. He was being kept inside of a holding cell at the bottom of the temple, a cell that restricted his essence in the Force from being picked up on. The Jedi didn't want anyone knowing he was alive, so it was kept a secret. They didn't go straight into interrogation. More or less, it was therapeutic questioning. The Jedi, based on the knowledge given to them by Hondo, were able to manipulate their wording and questions to fit a mantra that didn't have an aggressive assertion against Maul. Rather, they optimistically approached Maul with the intention of bringing him back from the dark side of the Force. They knew they couldn't beat the darkness out of him. The only way to inspire change is through compassion and warmth, so they gave it. Maul was very angry at them, always wishing death upon them, but there's only so far you can go until you wear yourself out with hate. The investigation, on the other hand, was heating up in its own way. Obi-Wan and Hondo were sent out to Megiddo, while Tera Sinube and Imogen D continued the same investigation on Coruscant. The Jedi weren't making their presence known. They were simply in the area, as it were. Nothing as to alarm anyone. Of course, both groups weren't trying to antagonize the Sith Lord, only find him and report him to the Council so that it could be dealt with by people that could handle it. The Council was fully aware of this mission and how it was going, as they were being continuously updated. The Jedi were allowed to carry this investigation on, though something peculiar happened. Master Dooku abandoned the Jedi Order, though this didn't have Master Yaddle stepping down from the High Council or dying. Because despite the fact that there were truths being told by Dooku, there was no significant death in the Order to drive Yaddle from her seat in the Council. Though, since Tera and Imogen D were already on investigation, they found this especially peculiar. Whether it was the disappearance of Sifo-Dyas, the death of Hego Damask, the notion of Hego with the Sith, or Dooku leaving the Order, it was all peculiar. As an investigator, there was too much coincidence, and they could not believe in coincidence. There was no headway coming from Maul, so the only hope of getting information out of him was really not any reliable. Though something else peculiar became noticeable to Tera Sinube and Imogen D once they continued their investigation into Hego. He was involved with both Sifo-Dyas and Dooku. The Jedi tried talking with Qui-Gon, but he had nothing to say about Dooku leaving the Order. He hadn't spoken to him since before leaving for Naboo. Qui-Gon was very disappointed, but he was focused on training his new student in Anakin Skywalker. The point that Sinube and Gundi were coming up with was reinforced by encounters between Sifo-Dyas and Hego Damask on Coruscant, as well as a combined meeting in the records of Damask Holdings between Palpatine, Hego, and Dooku. This was really odd. Hondo found this mystery very enthralling. And despite the several jokes about nunchuck lightsabers that he and Kenobi cracked from Megiddo to Coruscant, there was a genuine case for concern. Is it possible the Supreme Chancellor had a connection to the Sith? Was possible, but he wasn't the only one that actually interacted with Hego, though something became readily available thanks to Obi-Wan and Hondo. more or less Hondo. While on Megiddo, Hondo used his psychometry to break into Hago's family office, which only they had access to. Inside of the office, there were transfers and wiring of funds to Palpatine's personal account, which was used for support on Naboo a number of years ago, and even on Coruscant before he became Chancellor. Now again, despite the chances of a coincidence, there were other politicians that Hago locked onto, though none of them lasted with funding for an elongated period of time. Chances are Hago bounced his funds around to make it look like he wasn't just supporting Palpatine as a main guy for his plans, but they were also so overtly random. Why would Hago support a politician who didn't like a monarch on Mon Cala? Or what business did he have investing himself in local politics on Toydaria, a planet that he had no business relations to? The plot did get thicker. Hondo revealed a series of communications sent between Hago, another man named Tyrannus, and the Trade Federation, though this message went out shortly before his death. Tyrannus wasn't an old name, a new one, really new, not showing up on any records, more than a month old. Because they couldn't assume coincidence, the Jedi informed the Council of the realistic possibility of Palpatine being in connection to the Sith. For months, this would drag on, and while the Jedi by this point began making an impact on Maul, he did not know that Sidious was in fact Palpatine. He also didn't even know that Plagueis was Hago Damask. Though Maul did know of a man named Tyrannus, but his connection to them and the Sith he wasn't at all privy to. Maul knew some things, but for the most part he was kept in the dark, the way Palpatine wanted it to be. The Jedi didn't hold this against him, and praised him for his openness with them. Months would turn into a full year. Hondo would bounce on and off the case, helping where he could. He had actually been moved to follow Dooku around, which was requested by Taras Nubi without Yoda having any knowledge on this because of possibilities of attachments. Hondo was able to discover that there was something going on between Dooku and this other man. After capturing a recording, it became very clear who it was. The man was Palpatine. The voice was a bit deeper, but the speaking patterns and the articulation belonged to a man from Naboo, the Supreme Chancellor. The Jedi couldn't just pounce. They needed evidence. Over the next several months, they would situate themselves outside of offices and rooms to pick up recordings and information to accuse Palpatine of treason against the Galactic Republic. It would take patience, but they were Jedi. They had plenty of it. Within the span of a year, the Republic would be quietly informed, and within the blink of an eye, Palpatine and Dooku were never seen from or heard of again. Because of their sneaking around, the Jedi were able to stop the cloning projects on Kamino before they got too far. And because both Dooku and Palpatine were put down, as it were, Maul was able to be brought back to the light. Instead of Obi-Wan taking on a student, he befriended Maul and helped him through his recovery. The Council would treat this as they would Obi-Wan training a Padawan, and he would, eventually, receive the rank of Master through his dedication to Maul and bringing him back to the light. Hondo would also contribute to this. However, most of his contributions were, well, friendly. He lifted spirits, so that's what he did. Hondo also had no real interest in becoming a Jedi Master, so he continued doing his thing, which was fine by the Council's standards. Thanks to Imogendi's work on the case, he'd been offered a position on the High Council that he would accept. Qui-Gon, on the other hand, would raise Anakin into what he referred to as the ideal Jedi, and while there was some animosity from Qui-Gon on the nature of his former teacher's death, he stayed with the Jedi. As Qui-Gon said, he chose the light because it was there. With the galaxy able to stop itself from possible war, with new leaders rising to the formerly corrupt head of state, the Republic and the Jedi would strive for a new chance at a High Republic, a chance at an age without such tension and an age finally free from the Sith. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvan Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pim Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, The Eternal Padawan, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Mad Manny Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, Aaron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out the Patreon, the link is down below. Otherwise, let's just talk about this real quick. There's only so much you can do with a character who is a pirate, and I wanted this to be kind of fun. Obviously, this could have been like a meme video like the Order 67 video, but I have something else planned for meme-related content since you guys seem to enjoy that. With Hondo as a Jedi, I wanted to do a couple things. I wanted him to feel like himself, first of all, but I also wanted to give him his own quirks. We haven't really done any other, like, what if someone was a Jedi aside from, like, Satine. And so with Hondo, I wanted to make a unique case. I wanted him to have kind of like the Ezra Blaster lightsaber, which is a really cool design, and then also have him pick up on Force Psychometry, but not be a talented duelist. And so these attributes I really think played a big part into resolving the balance in the Force. And then the thing that I did in the end is something I actually really enjoyed doing, was kind of creating this crime mystery plot that was like kind of fun to just get into. It's a little bit different, change of pace. I know it didn't end with a large lightsaber duel like most of these do, but I kind of thought like a crime kind of pace would fit better with Hondo, because Hondo's not going to be able to fight Dooku or Palpatine. So I felt like it fit him to be like out of the action a little bit more and just kind of be doing more of an investigative piece, kind of like Quinlan did in the Clone Wars with the Hunt for Zero arc during like season 2 or 3 or whatever it was. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.